Hello everyone and welcome to today's video. Today we are doing the first official round of my 2028 March Madness political bracket that I introed in a video a few days ago. This is going to be taking it from 16 Democrats and 16 Republicans, totaling 32 total candidates. We're going to go through each matchup in the first round, and once it's all complete, we'll have the final 16 going on into the next round. We have a lot to go over in this video, so with that said, let's get going. The first matchup on the Democratic side is the number 1 seed Kamala Harris, the former vice president, facing off against Josh Green, the Democratic governor of the state of Hawaii. This one is a pretty, I would say, straightforward one where you have the former vice president, a ton of national name identification for the former vice president against Josh Green, the Democratic governor of Hawaii, who I'm sure the people of Hawaii know who he is, but outside the state of Hawaii probably won't have much recognition at all. In this Democratic primary, I think Harris wins and wins it pretty decisively. Kamala Harris wins as the 1 seed, as expected, and will advance into the next round. Next up, we have a very, very close matchup between the 8 and 9 seeds. This is Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker and New Jersey Senator Cory Booker. Now, in my pre-research that I did for this bracket and ranking these candidates and the matchups that were going to be happening, this is one of the closest ones that I've had. It's not the closest, but it is one of the closest ones that I had. And Pritzker versus Booker would be a very interesting Democratic primary because Booker, who did run for president back in 2020, the Democratic side, didn't do too strongly in that Democratic primary. J.B. Pritzker, governor of Illinois, has a lot of money. His family is very, very rich as well, so he can essentially self-fund an entire campaign if he has to. He's essentially been running for president ever since Donald Trump got reelected. So this should be a very interesting matchup. Cory Booker would obviously do very well with a lot of black voters as well, something that J.B. Pritzker would likely have trouble with. Pritzker is the governor of Illinois, maybe would do better with among Midwestern Democrats, a very key voting group that Democrats are going to need to win in 2028. I think this primary would be very competitive and very close. Ultimately, though, I do narrowly give the edge to J.B. Pritzker as essentially a 50-50 race. The ability to essentially self-fund an entire campaign would certainly help with name recognition and getting voter outreach in the early battleground states. I think Pritzker would narrowly lead Booker and advance into the next round. Next matchup, we have one that is honestly one of my favorites from a matchup perspective, and this is the battle of the Midwestern Democratic governors. Josh Shapiro, the number 5 seed, the governor of Pennsylvania, taking on Gretchen Whitmer, the number 12 seed, governor of Michigan. Now, I don't know if either of these candidates ultimately do run in 2028, and if they don't, they could both be very good potential Democratic vice presidential candidates, both of which I do believe were considered by Kamala Harris for 2024, and it makes a lot of sense. They're both governors of 2 of the most important swing states in the United States, the states of Pennsylvania and Michigan, and if the Democrats are going to win in 2028, Pennsylvania and Michigan will likely play a very huge role in that happening. As for Shapiro versus Whitmer themselves, obviously both of which represent very important states in terms of how they're dealing with the post-Trump era in these 2 states that did vote for Donald Trump in 2024. Josh Shapiro is certainly taking more of a combative stance and more vocal stance against Trump. Gretchen Whitmer has actually at times gone to the White House and worked with President Trump, essentially doing what she can to help out the state of Michigan while waiting essentially for Trump's term to be over. So a little bit of a different approach between Shapiro and Whitmer in terms of how to handle Trump in this Trump second term. As for what a Democratic primary would look like, I think it'd be a very interesting one, as Shapiro and Whitmer, both of which representing a similar region, would make for a very close competitive elections in this area of the country. But I do think Josh Shapiro would overall narrowly edge out Gretchen Whitmer. I think he would have slightly higher name recognition and would sort of essentially catch fire in a Democratic primary, as his ability to speak, I think, would outweigh Gretchen Whitmer's, and I think he would essentially become like a media darling and such once he did that. So, close matchup, but I would narrowly give the edge to Josh Shapiro. For the next matchup, number 4 versus number 13, we have Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the New York Democrat Congresswoman, facing off against former Barack Obama presidential chief of staff administrator Rahm Emanuel. This one also I feel like is one of the more lopsided margins. AOC is someone that's very popular and very prominent in Democratic circles, and someone that's very well known nationwide. If she runs for president in 2028, she's certainly going to be a force to be reckoned with. I don't believe representatives have a lengthy track record of doing well when running for president. Usually they have a higher office of like governor or senator, but AOC and the following that she has certainly makes up for that. I think she starts out as a strong contender for the Democratic primary in 2028, facing off against Rahm Emanuel, who has been very vocal in the fact that he's essentially running for president in 2028. However, going up against someone like AOC really does not have much of a choice or much of a chance. In this one, AOC wins this matchup and will advance into the next round. Now, this one is a very, very interesting matchup. We have number 6 versus number 11. This is Kentucky Governor Andy Beshear versus Arizona Senator Ruben Gallego. Now, this one I think is a very fascinating matchup. Both of these candidates very well could run, and Andy Beshear I think represents someone that is certainly a Democrat and someone that is a Democrat, but also someone that may be able to appeal to a lot of independent and Republican voters as the governor of Kentucky. Sort of similar in a mold to like a Bill Clinton of the 21st century type of Democrat. He's someone that, if he got to a general election, may put up very strong numbers where a lot of other Democrats maybe may not be able to. But in the Democratic primary, he'll be interesting as well, because usually in primaries, the candidates on the farther left and farther right do better and get more media attention. Beshear may have that problem, but if he could get to a general, he'd be a very interesting candidate. In terms of what he's doing for 2028, though, he's been very vocal, going after not just Donald Trump, but also J.D. Vance, who is one of the likely Republican candidates for 2028. So certainly his interest for 2028 is showing, and he is making a very strong pitch. Ruben Gallego, the senator from Arizona, though he was just elected in 2024, taking out Kari Lake, the Republican who's often been endorsed by Donald Trump in 2022 and in 2024. He's most notable, I would say, most recently for going on the attack against President Trump and endorsing some candidates like Graham Plattner, I believe he endorsed in the main Senate race. Gallego is also very important for the fact that he represents the state of Arizona, which is a very important swing state that will also be very key for the Democrats in 2028 if they're going to win back the White House. As for this matchup, I think Andy Beshear has a little bit of a narrow edge in this one, as the governor of Kentucky doesn't really give him too much of a boost national media-wise, but his ability to connect to voters, both independents and Republicans, I think would give him a little bit of a narrow edge and give him the advantage in this matchup. Next, we have another pretty powerhouse of a matchup. We have the number 3 versus number 14 seeds, and they are Pete Buttigieg facing off against Khanna. Pete Buttigieg, who did work in Joe Biden's administration before not too long ago, as the Secretary of Transportation. Before that, though, Pete Buttigieg really came out of nowhere and ran for president in 2020 and absolutely caught fire as a media darling among Democratic primary voters, looking like he's going to run again in 2028. And the early polling data and prediction betting markets, he starts out as one of the top 3 Democratic favorites, and he's certainly going to be a very significant force to be reckoned with. For 2028, I certainly have him starting out strong. Khanna is a Democratic, I would say progressive, who has been going around the country to a lot of the early Democratic primary states, so he clearly has interest in running for president. He probably will run for president, but he's facing off against Pete Buttigieg here, is going to be a force, and one that really doesn't have much of a chance here. Pete Buttigieg ends up winning and will advance to the next round. Now we have what is, in my opinion, the most interesting and maybe even most fun matchup on the Democratic side, number 7 versus number 10, Mark Kelly versus Jon Ossoff. This one's interesting because they're both Democratic senators. They're also 2 Democratic senators representing swing states that Donald Trump won in 2024, that Joe Biden won in 2020. Now, Mark Kelly, the Arizona senator, won, I believe, was it 2018 or 2022 for the first time, defeating Martha McSally and then defeating Martha McSally again to get a full term. And he is someone that is a very vocal President Trump critic, and someone Democrats voters are certainly going to like. Also being the husband of former Representative Gabby Giffords also gives him a certain amount of media, I would say, clout as well, and that will certainly help him. Jon Ossoff is a little bit of a Democrat rising star. He's up for re-election in Georgia in 2026, and early on it looked like could that be a seat Republicans are targeting, and it's still going to be likely pretty close, but Jon Ossoff has been polling very strongly in the early polls thus far. He is getting a huge amount of money to help him out in this race and has raised a ton, and if he ends up winning by a, say, larger margin than expected, well, he'll be locked in that Senate seat for the next 6 years, so he won't have to worry about running for his Senate seat in 2028. That may give him the opportunity to explore a run for president in 2028 if he chooses. Also worth noting, if he wins by a larger margin, that may also play into this sort of next generation Democrat that could run in 2028 in the post-Donald Trump era. Now, I don't know if he will, and I could see a little bit of, if John Ossoff does run, trying for some Democrats to make the argument of like a Barack Obama or a John F. Kennedy, someone that's a younger senator and trying to run for president and kind of go through that mold. I don't know if he will, but Mark Kelly right now, I would say, has the narrow slight edge in the fact that A, he has shown the most interest of these two in running for president. He has the little bit of advantage right now. So I am going to narrowly give the edge to Mark Kelly. But if John Ossoff does win the Georgia Senate race, and I expect that he will, but if he does win it by a larger margin than expected, I wouldn't be too shocked to see him have that chatter of a 2028 run. It's a little bit quick of a turnaround, so I don't know if he ultimately does decide to run. I think 2032 probably would make more sense for Ossoff than 2028, but certainly his name will probably pop up, like with Shapiro and Whitmer in the vice president conversation as well. So Mark Kelly gets the narrow edge, but that is certainly the closest matchup I've had on the Democratic side. Lastly, for the Democrats, we have the number 2 versus number 15 matchups, and this one is just really honestly not too fair for the challenger. Number 2, Gavin Newsom, going up against Senator Chris Murphy of Connecticut, and this is without a doubt just a Gavin Newsom complete blowout. Gavin Newsom, the governor of California so far, depending on the polls you're looking at, is either the favorite or second place favorite for the 2028 Democratic nomination. He's been perhaps the most vocal President Trump critic out there among all the Democrats nationwide. He is without a doubt running for president in 2028, has made that known to everyone, and he is one of the odds-on favorites to be the Democratic nominee. Chris Murphy, senator from Connecticut, would probably not have too much name recognition countrywide and would essentially get demolished in this Democratic primary against Gavin Newsom. No disrespect to Chris Murphy, but Newsom wins without too much of a fight here. So those are all the Democrats. Now we move on to the Republicans. For the first matchup, we have the Vice President of the United States, J.D. Vance, taking on former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. And in this one, without a doubt, similar to the last one with Newsom, J.D. Vance is going to be winning this Republican primary matchup and advancing into the next round. Pompeo did consider a run in 2024, even when President Trump was running in the primary. He may decide to run again, may not, but J.D. Vance would win really against any Republican, except for maybe one, which I'll be getting to in 1 second. But he would beat essentially almost any Republican, and he will advance to the next round. We have what is, I think, personally the most interesting matchup potentially of this video, and on the Republican side, the number 8 versus number 9 seed, Tulsi Gabbard versus Tucker Carlson. Now, Tulsi Gabbard, a former Democrat that has become a Republican and is now working in President Trump's administration, versus Tucker Carlson, who during the first Trump term was perhaps the most prominent President Trump defender on Fox News. He became very popular and a close ally of the president. Now in the second term, Carlson's been breaking with the president and interviewing a lot of, I would say, questionable figures. So Tucker Carlson's standing among the MAGA wing of the Republican Party has certainly been damaged since the start of the second Trump term, whereas Tulsi Gabbard's, I would say, has gone up in the eyes of many in the Trump world. I think this would be a very fascinating primary, a very close one I think Tulsi Gabbard narrowly edges out due to Tucker Carlson's waning support among the MAGA wing of the party, but that would be a very interesting matchup. Next, we have the number 5 versus number 12 seeds, and this is also a very interesting one. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. versus Josh Hawley, the senator of Missouri. RFK Jr., obviously big in the Trump administration with the Make America Healthy Again movement, MAHA, going up against Josh Hawley, the senator from Missouri. Josh Hawley's had some speculation about possible runs for president in 2028 and maybe even in 2032 as well. He's on the younger side, but he's someone in the areas like, I think, big tech and healthcare. He's put some bills out in the Senate, so he could certainly be someone to consider. Robert F. Kennedy Jr., obviously the Kennedy family, became a very important ally of President Trump in the final months of the campaign. And we saw when Kennedy was running for president in 2024 as an independent, there's a good percentage of Americans out there that do support RFK Jr. And if he were to run for president ever in a Republican primary, I think a good amount of them would still turn out for him and support him. So with that said, I think RFK Jr. would win and advance to the next round. He would have a stronger floor support than Josh Hawley. It would ultimately, I think, win that primary. Next, we have the number 4 versus number 13 seeds, Nikki Haley, going up against Tom Cotton. Nikki Haley was the runner-up to Donald Trump in the 2024 Republican primary, though she represents the Republican Party of probably before Donald Trump, the George Bush, Mitt Romney type Republican Party. Tom Cotton honestly isn't too far off of that Republican Party either. He's kind of in a weird gray area of the Bush era and the Trump era. It kind of falls between there. there's not really too much to say about this matchup other than it would be two very similar candidates going against each other. I think Nikki Haley has the edge, given that she ran for president in 2024 and is likely more well known among Republican voters. I don't think either one of these candidates would be, I would say, the favorite for 2028, but I do think Nikki Haley would probably edge this one out and advance into the next round. Now, for the next matchup, we have a very politically interesting one when it comes to a policy standpoint. The number 6 versus number 11 seed, Vivek Ramaswamy versus Senator Rand Paul. So you may be wondering, what's Vivek doing here? Vivek Ramaswamy is running for governor of Ohio right now. This is a very close race in Ohio, one that even the polls and betting odds actually show Vivek Ramaswamy narrowly trailing in that race. Now, the caution with Ohio is since about 2016, it's become more of a likely Republican state than a toss-up state, but seeing as 2026 is shaping up to be a pretty strong year for the Democrats, we may very well see Vivek Ramaswamy ultimately lose this race to the Democrat Amy Acton. And if that does happen, obviously there's no chance Vivek Ramaswamy will run for president in 2024 or in 2028. But Vivek Ramaswamy did run for president in 2024 and actually got a pretty decent amount of media attention and attention from Republican primary voters. So I would start him out in the top 10 in terms of possible Republicans for 2028, even though I'm not too sure if it will happen. Now, if the polls end up being wrong and Vivek Ramaswamy does win in 2026, and if he wins by a larger margin than expected, well, that may give him a little bit of a boost nationally, and maybe he decides to look at a potential run in 2028. I don't think he will, but it's possible that he could, seeing as he's already run before once. Now, for number 11, we have Rand Paul, who just today did a video or did an interview with CBS saying he's 50-50 on a 2028 presidential run. Now, Rand Paul has been one of the most vocal Republican critics of President Trump in the entire Republican Party. He is someone that is more of a Republican libertarian than a Make America Great Again Republican. And that's what makes this matchup of Vivek versus Rand Paul so interesting, is Vivek is one of the most prominent, I would say, populist Republicans in the MAGA movement out there, and Rand Paul is probably one of the most anti-MAGA Republicans out there. So this matchup would be very interesting from a policy standpoint. It would be a really good test of where the Republican Party is going in populism versus Republican libertarianism. So ultimately what happens is I do think Vivek Ramaswamy would probably get an endorsement by Donald Trump in this matchup, or a little bit of the Trump voters would back him over Rand Paul, as Paul is very much of an anti-Trump critic. And I think there's more of those voters than the anti-Trump voters at this current point in time in the Republican Party. So I think they narrowly would go to Vivek, but this would certainly be a very fascinating matchup if this did play out. Next, we have the number 3 versus number 14 seed. This is another interesting one. This is Ron DeSantis, the governor of Florida, versus Thomas Massie, the representative from Kentucky, who, like Rand Paul, close friends of Rand Paul, is also another vocal anti-Trump critic. It's interesting is that both of these people were very prominent anti-Trump critics at one point. DeSantis running against Trump in the 2024 Republican primary for president. It seems things have been made up between Trump and DeSantis, and that there are reports that Trump would even consider appointing DeSantis to a position in his administration in the final 2 years of his second term. As for this matchup, though, there's not really too much to talk about. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, obviously very notable, one of the most popular Republicans in terms of name ID in the Republican Party. After the 2024 election, he certainly lost a lot of his luster running against President Trump, and a lot of the MAGA wing of the party does not like him as much as they used to before. But I think a lot of MAGA Republicans would still say he's one of the best governors in the country. And I do think in a primary where Donald Trump is not running, a lot of that support would ultimately go back to DeSantis, especially if it's against a very vocal Trump critic, Thomas Massie, almost like an example of the enemy of my enemy is my friend type of scenario. I think Ron DeSantis would certainly benefit from facing off against someone like Massie and would win in advance to the next round in this one. Next, we have the number 7 versus number 10 seeds. This is Texas Senator Ted Cruz going up against former Virginia Governor now, Glenn Youngkin. This one is very interesting because Ted Cruz did run for president in 2016, and it is reports indicating he would be interested in running again in 2028, facing off against Glenn Youngkin, the former Virginia governor, who won a very close race, shocking a lot of people in 2021 to become the governor of Virginia, when the governor's race has not gone red in Virginia since, I think, 2009. So Youngkin, very significant political force in Virginia. Now, obviously, he's out of office, and the Republicans just got absolutely crushed in the governor's election in 2025 in Virginia. But Youngkin still winning that state put him on the map nationally, and he's someone that at very least could look to curtail that into a potential presidential run in 2028. I still think he's more likely to be a vice presidential candidate than presidential candidate for 2028, but it would be a very interesting matchup. Ted Cruz, Glenn Youngkin, both of which are, I would say, pro-President Trump, but not necessarily like on the Vivek wing of the Republican Party. They're a little bit more quiet about their support for President Trump, and that could be trying to toe the party line. I'm saying more for Glenn Youngkin and trying to win over suburban voters in a general election. Ted Cruz, one of the most, I would say, conservative Republicans in the Senate, and very vocal about that even before Trump ran for president in 2016. I think this would be an interesting matchup. I do give the narrow edge to Ted Cruz, as even though his victories in Texas and the Senate races have been very narrow, he does still have a very wide, I would say, following the Republican Party. He's very well known nationally. Now, it doesn't mean he's necessarily super well liked across the country, but in the Republican primary alone, I think he's more well known, and I think that would give him a little bit of an edge in this race. Last matchup on the Republican side, we have Marco Rubio going up against Brian Kemp, the number 2 versus number 15 seeds. Marco Rubio right now is the Secretary of State for Donald Trump, and he is someone that has become an absolute darling of the Republican Party and Make America Great Again wing of the party. President Trump even called him the best Secretary of State ever, and he is someone whose stock is absolutely rising in the polls and the betting odds and the prediction markets and pretty much everywhere nationally and even in the early states. New Hampshire's new poll came out showing him up around 28%, Vance only beating him by around 20 points, which sounds like a lot, and it certainly is, but reminder, he was down 50 points just 6 months ago. Marco Rubio, obviously, skyrocketing in this time, and he certainly, if he decides to run in 2028, is someone that's going to be one of the top Republicans in consideration for the Republican primary. Brian Kemp, governor of Georgia, also is a very considerable force in the state of Georgia, but he does not have the national, I would say, well-known national name identity as Marco Rubio would. And in this matchup, certainly Marco Rubio would get the endorsement of President Trump over Brian Kemp and everything that happened with Trump and Kemp in Georgia. Without a doubt, Marco Rubio would win this matchup and advance to the next round. Now, with that, we can officially look at the Sweet 16 of our bracket. There are now 8 Democrats and 8 Republicans remaining, and this is what the matchups are for the next round. Kamala Harris versus J.B. Pritzker, the number 1 versus number 8 seed on the Democratic side, will be facing off. Number 5 versus number 4, Josh Shapiro versus Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez will be facing off. That will be a very interesting matchup for the next round. Andy Beshear, the number 6 seed, going up against Pete Buttigieg, the number 3 seed. That will be a very interesting one as well. Number 2 versus number 7, Gavin Newsom versus Mark Kelly facing off on the Democratic side. That rounds out Democrats. On the Republican side, J.D. Vance versus Tulsi Gabbard, the 1v8 seed, on advancing for that matchup. Robert F. Kennedy Jr., number 5, versus Nikki Haley, number 4. That will be happening. Ron DeSantis versus Vivek Ramaswamy, the 3 versus 6 seed. And number 7 versus number 2, we have Marco Rubio versus Ted Cruz, the rematch of 2016, the 2016 finalists. The Trump, Cruz versus Rubio will be facing off in the next video. I hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure to leave all your comments down below about the matchups you saw in this video, and the matchups for the next round will be happening in the next video. Make sure to leave your thoughts all there as well. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure to like and subscribe if you did, and I hope to see you in a future video.